Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the final in this Digging Deep series here at Jamie's Farm. It's called A Sense of Space, and thanks for joining us. Now, today we're going to be hearing from some really incredible people about what having a sense of space actually means, particularly for young people, and why it's so important in both a physical and an emotional sense. Now, first of all, we'd like to give you a real sense of space and hear from some young people themselves about what space means to them.
My favourite place is a hill, 100%. Not a specific hill, but a specific time, which will be either whilst the sun's rising or setting. It makes me feel free and calm, and it helps me clear my thoughts.
My favourite place is the quiet zone because it's quiet and Miss Folks always helps me.
It is the field with the balls because you can roll down the hill. There's a stream at the bottom where you can make tons of memories.
My favourite space is my room because it's my room and nobody else gets to go in there. My favourite place to go is in Africa and Zimbabwe because it's lots of animals and things to do. Also, my mum's from Zimbabwe, so.
Woods. The woods is just a really calm and settling place. I used to go there with my older brother, and if I'm in pain or I'm sad, I can just scream and no one can hear me.
My favourite place to be is outside because I like to spend time in nature.
Beautiful. I could watch that all day. What a great start. So before we start with the rest of the afternoon's events, I'd like to invite up the founder of Jamie's Farm, Tish Feilden, and invite him to just say a few words and give a look ahead to the rest of the Digging Deep series. Jamie.
Hello, James. First of all, I'd like to say a massive thank you to you. You are no longer a trustee of Jamie's Farm, but you've gone above and beyond in this series and done the most wonderful job. I don't know how, really, of navigating the technology, but also managing to be remarkably insightful as ever.
Don't speak too soon about the technology.
Well, I couldn't do it myself, so well done. I'd also like to thank all the contributors we've had throughout the series. It's remarkable the people who've stepped up to speak on behalf of Jamie's Farm and debate and I think really energise us at a time when we need it most, because this has been a remarkably difficult year for a number of people, for most of us really in different ways. But certainly my sense, I've felt very energised and excited by each of the events so far, and I'm sure that today's will be no less exciting. But when it comes to the end of the event, I'm always looking to have a glass of wine and join with others to collaborate and come up with ideas on how to make the world a better place. So I'm sort of left with this very strange feeling when I find myself on my sofa without the other people that we've been talking to throughout the event. So with the world opening up, which we're hoping is going to continue to happen throughout this summer, we have decided to bring people together in a fourth Digging Deep on the 24th of July. We're hoping to get people together at Lenton Farm, where we ran the Cock and Bull Festival, a really special place. We ran the Cock and Bull Festival for 7 years. I've been told to mention a number of times this is not Cock and Bull, this is Digging Deep. This is an opportunity to get together, to talk, debate, but to have that glass of wine together afterwards, to probably a glass of cider actually on the farm there, I would have thought, to have a feast together, and hopefully to come up with some really exciting ideas as a group that evening. And later on in the evening, we will summon some of the spirit of Cock and Bull and have a proper party as well. But we really hope that people can join us. Jill's just put the ticket link up there. We're hoping to get on and sell tickets pretty rapidly so that we can then ensure that the event goes ahead. But we would love to see you all there in person on the 24th of July.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. And 24th of July, 72 people now on this call. You are all cordially and personally invited. You heard it by Jamie Feilden to come down to the farm and do some digging deep. Thank you, Jamie, and we'll be hearing a bit from you later. But for now, we're going to move on to the rest of the programme for this afternoon. Now, we've already heard today from some of the young people and what they feel about space, what space means to them. And a little bit later, we'll be hearing from some inspiring adults, in particular Emmanuel Akpan-Inwang, who is the founder of an extraordinary home for young people, as he discusses with Jake what it really takes to, what really matters to young people about the space that the place that they live in, and why it's so critical to outcomes for young people. And now, following this, we'll be joined by a fabulous panel to discuss how the beauty, purpose, and care of our environment helps us all to thrive. And we've got some really fascinating speakers to give you some insights around why regenerating spaces can actually regenerate all of us. So don't forget, you can, on the right-hand side, there's panels where you can ask questions. And we will, I think, be carrying out some polls later on, asking you questions as well. But first of all, we've heard already from some young people about why spaces really matter to them. And I'd like to start now by handing over to Tish, the co-founder of Jamie's Farm, to talk about why it is that special places and spaces matter so much to the young people who come to Jamie's Farm.
We've just heard from children about what they find important about different spaces. And we're going to unpick this a bit, and it reminds me of when we had our first group that came here to my home, and it was the things that the children said in their reflections that taught us what we needed to know in order to replicate this model of Jamie's Farms. Here, I don't have to watch my back, was said to me by a young man from Hackney, and I've heard it 100 or more times by children who visit the farms, because too often they're living with hypervigilance in the streets, in their communities, even in their families. They're on alert. Security seems to come in many ways, but in their words, here there are no sirens. When we feel safe, we're at our best. And it's only then that we can fully engage in relationships, use our imaginations and creativity, learn and think. They talked about loving the homely spaces, of being all around one table to eat together, to chat, to share stories, to communicate. They loved cooking together, and they loved hanging out together, bouncing on robust sofas, having old furniture that they were interested in what the history of this was, rather than something that might break if they leant against it. Every child needs something different, whether it is the space for freedom, to play, or whether it is the cosy space to feel contained and safe. On our farms, we're lucky. We have access to nature, to gardens, fields, animals, woodland, ancient buildings, all of which have got different associative qualities. The beauty of nature can move the spirit of the most insulated child. It can bring a smile to the face of a reticent teenager, or bring to a standstill the blustering, noisy, argumentative teenager. Beauty is free. It can be found staring into the flames around a campfire. It could be found in a city park or a small back garden, in pictures, films, art, music. But children come to us often not having had previous experience of its impact and benefits. But then when they leave, they go on to actively search out beauty as if it was a food. They search out nature, peace, and on return to their homes and schools, they can organise themselves sometimes. We had some girls who formed a group to picnic in the park each weekend. They were searching out adventures, new spaces, socialising together, and enjoying the exploration of new and different. It's our task at Jamie's Farm to create places and spaces of safety and inspiration.
That was Tish, of course, and what a beautiful, it just makes you want to get outside, doesn't it, and enjoy the space. Now, it's amazing how that does affect us, and we've heard why it affects young people, and who, after all, is who we're talking about today. Now, I'd like to talk to people who can provide that space. So I'd like to invite Emmanuel, who I mentioned earlier, up to the stage. He's the founder of a really unique and incredible project called the Lighthouse Children's Home, which he's currently in the process of designing, which is really an entirely new style of children's home. So welcome, Emmanuel. If you're able to come and join us on the stage, that would be fantastic. And I'd also like to invite Jake, the Deputy CEO here at Jamie's Farm, to join us. It's great to see you again. I've got Jake, and I'm hoping, yes, Emmanuel managed to navigate his way up to the stage. It's a long way, tricky to get up here. But thank you both for joining us. And I'm going to hand over really to Jake and Emmanuel. We're going to listen in really to your conversation about young people and space and how you can create a space that nurtures young people.
Yeah, thank you, James. Yeah, I have looked at myself on this screen, and my hair definitely got a lot longer since the first one of these. I'm looking a lot more dishevelled, so apologies everyone for that. But welcome, Emmanuel. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. You're on Radio 4 yesterday morning, but this is the bigger gig, I heard you say to me earlier on, so that's great. It's really great to have somebody who's doing what you're doing, to come on and reflect about place, because you offer a slightly different perspective on this, I think, and we're going to talk about some of the similarities of Jamie's Farm, but what you're trying to do is trying to create that in the heart of a city. And we've just seen some wonderful images of how the beauty of nature, Tish talking eloquently about how that can make a real difference to young people. You are purposely deciding to do it in the heart of London, your first one, and then it will go to other cities. And so we're going to touch on how you've been able to recreate some of what Tish has talked about in that space. But first of all, I think it'd be good just to give a little bit of background about Lighthouse, if that was all right. And especially the link with Jamie's Farm, if you could just share that a little bit so people could understand what we are with us.
Yeah, so Lighthouse comes from a number of years of research into children's homes. I first became interested in the experience of children in care as a teacher. I was teaching a number of looked after children. Fortunately, they weren't doing as well as they should have been doing. It was only when I spoke to their pastoral leaders that I found out that they were looked after. And so over a number of years, I increasingly researched looked after children and came across some of the challenges that were taking place in children's homes. There's about 8,000 children who live in children's homes across the UK. Unfortunately, their outcomes are much poorer than everyone else. I got the opportunity to visit a number of children's homes across the UK a few years ago, and managed to identify a number of real challenges that take place in them. One of those challenges is around the people that we recruit. Unfortunately, salary is not particularly high, training is not really where it needs to be, and turnover tends to be particularly quite high. Another issue is around the purpose of children's homes and what we're supposed to be doing there. Lots of children's homes claim to be therapeutic, but don't provide the therapeutic support that you'd really expect, given that a lot of children who live in them have quite severe mental health difficulties. I suppose one of the other challenges was around place, and a lot of children's homes can be hundreds of miles away from the children's local community. Children can spend a few weeks, sometimes even just a few days in a children's home before having to move to another location. And we felt that we could do much, much better in children's homes. I also had the opportunity to go to Germany and Denmark and observe some children's homes over there. And they had taken quite a different approach in those countries. And we managed to bring back some of the things that I learned over in Germany and Denmark back to the UK in order to create this new model. And the Lighthouse model essentially has 4 key principles, which we call people, place, purpose, and pedagogy. So I'm recruiting really great people and training them properly, making sure that we have a clear purpose around education and therapeutic support, making sure that the places are homely and do all the things that Tish was talking about, and also use a method of practice called social pedagogy, which is quite common in Western Europe, but quite unheard of in the UK. And we've taken a huge amount of inspiration from Jamie's farm, and particularly around the physical location, creating a space which isn't necessarily a children's home, but feels like it could be a home. It feels very warm and homely. And one of the things that I really loved about being at the farm was this concept of family as well. People coming together, sharing food. And those are things that we've really been inspired by at Lighthouse.
Great. Well, I mean, let's go back to that now. So you've basically had a shell of a building in South London. How have you gone about trying to create that? And let's look into kind of some of the detail. And you've put a lot of money into creating this space, but what is it that's been really important on your kind of wish list in terms of that development?
Yeah, and it has been a huge amount of money that has gone into that. So it's a £2.5 million project to turn a derelict old family home, which has stood empty for about 8 years, into a warm, homely environment. And I suppose much of what we've done has started with the research. So we thought really carefully about the location of the home. Now, we did want to be in London. We did want to be in a city, which makes us, quite different from somewhere like Jamie's farm. And the reason for doing it in London is because London only has about 1/3 of the children's homes places that it needs. And what that means is that lots of children who are from London and need children's home places end up being placed all across the country. So in South London, where we're located, most children from there are placed in North Wales and the northeast of England. And that really fractures family relationships. And that's something that we felt really need to be addressed. But one of the things that I saw at Jamie's farm was how much children tended to really benefit from being in nature. So we decided to put it on the edge of the city. So we're about 5 minutes walk, essentially, from the Surrey border. And what that means is that we can quite easily take children out into the countryside, so they have that greenery, have that opportunity to be in nature when they want to. We've also thought really carefully about the design of the building. Now, children's homes are quite a heavily regulated space. What that can sometimes mean is that they feel quite institutional when you go into them. And one of my big frustrations was going into a children's home and finding that there was a lock on the living room, or you would wander around and see fire exit signs or staff notices. These are all things that are symptomatic of an institution and not a home. And so what we try to do at Lighthouse is design all of those things out. And we've worked with an amazing architect over the course of the last 2 years to really think really carefully about how we can keep children safe and, where possible, adhere to regulations, but also challenge the regulations and make sure that we have a place that looks and feels like a home. So when you come in through the front door at Lighthouse, you should look around and think, wow, this is a lovely family home, not this is a particular children's home. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think it's a great question. And I want to touch on the regulation thing, because I think that is emblematic of a lot of over-regulation in certain areas and kind of almost over-professionalization, not just in terms of a home that might end up becoming quite sterile and quite neutral and lack the kind of love and heart and care that we really want to see, but also in the ethos that happens within that home. That's often the case as well, that it becomes about ticking boxes as opposed to remembering what the whole purpose of this enterprise is actually to do. So let's look into that regulation a little bit more. So what are those regulations that you're adhering to, but that you are kind of having to think carefully about how you do it within the limitations or within the framework of this needs to be a home.
Yeah, I mean, some things they're seemingly quite small, but they become quite important when you're in a children's home. So an example of something that I found quite annoying was around fire exit signs. Now, it is really important to indicate where the fire exit is. It's important for people to be able to locate that, but you don't need a massive green flashing sign. It's only really in institutions and offices that you see those massive flashing signs. And we worked closely with our architects to find a design solution. And actually what that ends up being is quite a small strip around the door. So everybody knows what a fire exit is, but it's not particularly obvious. And it's just one of those things that ensures that we're able to create that homely environment. Some other things are things like having a table which is large enough for everybody to sit around and come together. We think that meal times are important. We've seen that a lot at Jamie's Farm. So we've made sure that we have a kitchen space where everybody who's in the home at any one time can come together and share a meal and have that sense of togetherness and coziness. That's incredibly important. Some of the things are a bit more complex. So we took the decision to have 2 additional flats on site in the home, along with the 6 bedrooms. So the home is going to look after 6 children. And one of the reasons for doing that is because children in children's homes often face a cliff edge at 16, and they get removed from children's homes because they age out of children's homes at the age of 16, and that can be within a couple of days of their 16th birthday, and then move somewhere completely different into semi-independent, often unregulated provision. And by having those flats on site, we have somewhere where those children can move on to, where we can continue to look after them until they're ready to move home. So that was a design solution that we thought about carefully as well.
That's great. And actually, I know that it's one of the things that marks Lighthouse out compared to other organisations is the commitment into the long term to look after these young people who often get just kind of turfed out at the end of their experience in care. So I think that's great that you found a kind of design solution to work that in as well. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the point that you made and Tish touched on as well, around the kind of sense of belonging. You want the big space around the dining room table where people can eat together. But then also there are other times where you need the containment and you need the safety that helps bring you. And it's quite interesting because we at the farm at the moment are operating very much in COVID secure conditions. So that means a lot of work outside. It means a lot of work with our doors open and our windows open. And what it means also is that feels occasionally quite uncontained. And for some young people, when they're used to kind of quite chaotic home lives, it's quite difficult to get them to that place of calm and safety. How are you aiming to do that at the Lighthouse?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And what comes to mind is when I was speaking to residential care workers about their work across the country, a lot of them used the idea of containment and that what they were doing is containing children, essentially until they became somebody else's problem. The issue with that is that containment doesn't work. You can keep children safe for a period of time, especially if you don't let them go anywhere or do anything, or if they're hundreds of miles away from a city, you can contain children. But one day they have to return to their communities, maybe return to their families, and they're not necessarily in a position to be able to deal with that and address that. So we should be supporting children to address the challenges of life that come to them. The other thing I think when it comes to supporting children and keeping them safe is the importance of relationships. And children feel safe when they have people that they're connected with. And what's quite interesting about institutionalization and children's homes being institutions is it's not just the physical environment which makes something institutional. It's also the relationships that you have with people. And I think those relationships are often too institutional as well. What we're really prioritizing at Lighthouse is the relationships, making sure that we're recruiting people with the ability to build strong relationships with children, prioritizing relationships. And when we create that sense of connectivity, a sense of belonging, we think that that's going to be able to support children to deal with the challenges of the lives that they're often living.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And the point is about, I think we're going to hear a lot more about it later, the environment you're in needs to reflect and add to the ethos that you're trying to create. And I think it's one of the things that's really wonderful about Lighthouse is just how much that is emphasised, that the environment needs to feed in to that kind of, it's not about when I come in here that I am the worker and then you are the kid. You know, we're working together on things. And I suppose that one of the things I wanted to ask you about as well, which is very important here at Jamie's Farm, is the idea that the kids who come with us help build that environment, help care for that environment, out nurture that environment, add to it, leave their mark on it. I suppose, what are your ideas about how the young people at Lighthouse are going to do some of that? Because that's certainly a technique within social pedagogy as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely is. And I totally agree with you, Jake. It is really important for children to have that sense of belonging and be able to make their mark. I think the idea of home is more than just a physical environment, isn't it? It's somewhere where you belong, somewhere where you feel that you have some sort of ownership over. And it's quite ironic that, when it comes to children's homes, it's often not a home or somewhere that children feel that they can leave their mark. And actually, it often means that children leave their mark in ways that can often be detrimental. So it's quite common in children's homes for things to be broken and destroyed. And we think that's because children are often alienated from their environment. So there are a number of things that we're doing to keep that in mind. One of those things is actually in some ways leaving the home unfinished, because we want children to be able to come in and make decisions about the environment. And that might be what's being planted in the garden. It might be the colour of their rooms. They should be able to make their mark there. We've also set things up in a way where children just can come in and use spaces in lots of different ways. So we have 2 living rooms, for example, and one which can be a bit more formal, where children may watch television, but somewhere where they can go and they can turn it into whatever they want. It might be an art studio one year, it might be a recording studio somewhere else, but it means as different children come in and they have different needs and they want to do different things with spaces, they have the opportunity to do that. It's also things like being able to have some sort of autonomy and decision making about what goes in the room. So whenever a child moves out, a number of the items in the room will go with them, so that the next child who comes in is able to make a number of decisions about the things that are in there. And I think that will lead also to a sense of belonging as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think it touches on what Tish said earlier around the creativity that young people need to have. And some of that is inspired by the local environment that they're in, but some of it can also be about doing to the environment and creating something there that actually makes them feel at home. And it just gives them that sense of agency, which is really crucial to them. I listened into your thing on Radio 4 yesterday, which was excellent, and I think everyone should listen. But one of the things that I found interesting was Ofsted came up, and it's interesting that 80% of children's homes currently, this is one of the things that you were kind of challenged on, 80% are rated good or outstanding as it is. So, so Lighthouse is coming in saying this needs to change, outcomes aren't good enough. Ofsted is saying, well, actually 80% of them are good enough, only 3% are inadequate. I suppose my question to you on that is, when you've been into other children's homes, certainly, and we're focusing on place here, but I know the ethos comes into that as well. What is it that you don't think is actually adequate, is good enough as it is in some of these other places, that is something that really makes you inspired to change it in the home that you're trying to create?
Well, I think the first thing is, there's a real question as to whether 80% of homes are good or outstanding. I think people should really look carefully at the raw data, and we have looked at the raw data, and there's some questions around that 80% figure to begin with. The other thing is, I suppose the Ofsted regulations are set within a particular context and our current set of expectations. And those regulations are really about the outputs that the homes are doing at the time that children are in the home. They don't look at the long-term outcomes of those children. They don't look at the broader context in the way that we really should. And one of the things that we're trying to do at Lighthouse is set a new standard for how children's homes are run, and really get people to understand what children's homes can potentially do. And I think maybe Ofsted really needs to look at factors like how homely a place is, the relationships that children have with the staff. They do to a certain extent, but even in homes where even homes that are outstanding, there's often the case that staff turnover is still alarmingly high. I visited an outstanding children's home a few months ago, and it's really great, but staff turnover is at 80%. That is really going to have an impact on the relationships that those staff have with those children if there's a real lack of consistency. So I think we do need to look really carefully at the entire context and think about the sorts of standards that we want to set for children's homes and the things that we want a regulator to look at.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. And also, if you look at the long term and the outcomes that you want to achieve, and emphasize less this kind of box ticking stuff that makes it all about the regulations and kind of removing risk to yourself, then you're more likely to create the home that creates the kind of magic that I know that you're intending to create at Lighthouse. And yeah, it's very exciting. You know, we've been involved for a long time, and it's great that we're getting to a point where this year we're going to have young people there at the Lighthouse home, and it should be excellent, to be honest. You know, everything that you're saying seems to ring true, and certainly rings true with the Jamie's Farm example here.
Yeah, and I'd like to say just a huge thank you to yourself, Jake, and the rest of the team at Jamie's Farm. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with you on the development of this project over the last few years. The project wouldn't exist without yourself and other people at the farm, and we're really looking forward to opening the home and celebrating that with you, and hopefully working together with the farm over the next few years.
Yeah, and thank you, Emmanuel, and good luck. And I would just say, just on that last point around Ofsted, I think it's one of the things that is worth recognising. If Ofsted was regulating Jamie's Farm, it would probably look very different. And I think it's something to think about, actually. It's something like that is sometimes over-regulation can have real challenges to that. So it's great that you're able to challenge that in what you're trying to create. James, over to you.
Jake, thank you so much. And Emmanuel, thank you. Just a quick question. You mentioned the Today programme. Was it that you were on yesterday?
Yeah.
If people want to listen back to it, it was yesterday morning.
Yeah, so if you go to the BBC website, you'll be able to find a link there. It's also on our own website, lighthousechildrenshomes.org.uk. So if you go to either place, you'll be able to click on the link and listen to the recording.
Brilliant. Well, thank you both. Absolutely fascinating. I look forward to seeing the Lighthouse in action one day. Best of luck.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, James.
Well, thanks to them. I particularly enjoyed the idea of creating a space where children are allowed to make their mark on the rooms and make their own use of it. That was really inspiring. What Emmanuel's up to now. The next thing that we're moving on to is an incredible panel. We've got some really interesting people for you to hear from this afternoon. I'd like to invite up to the stage first of all Dr. Sue Stuart-Smith. Now, if you can clamber your way up to the stage, Sue is a very well-known psychotherapist. She teaches at the Tavistock, a psychiatrist. But I think what's most relevant for us today is she's the author of a book called The Well-Gardened Mind, which is an absolutely brilliant insight into the role that gardening can play on children and, frankly, adults and their well-being. So hopefully Sue will make her way up to the stage. We'll also be joined by Chris Wright. Hi, Sue. Chris is the CEO of Catch-22. Now, Catch-22 is an extraordinary social business which, with a long pedigree, working with hundreds of thousands of young people and adults and delivering support. And Chris, if he's able to join us on the stage, has himself worked as a social worker in the youth justice system and is an immense figure, I would say, in the service sector. But I would have to say that because he is also a board member of my employer, Big Society Capital. So he is, in essence, my boss. So I want to be very nice to him today. And then I'm also pleased to welcome Jamie Feilden, who you've already heard from, but is obviously the founder of, co-founder with Tish of Jamie's Farm. And he'll be able to share more of his insights on how they at Jamie's Farm think about the sense of place and space on young people. But perhaps the person who will also join us and can really is an expert in this and is really a pioneer in the whole concept of environmental design is Peter Clegg, who is the founder of Feilden Clegg Bradley Architects Practice and trustee of Jamie's Farm also. So what we're going to do, I've hopefully reasonably accurately introduced you. Please correct me if I've got anything wrong. But what I'd like to do is invite each of you to give a little overview on this question of the importance of space and place for young people. And perhaps if I could start with you, Sue, because you've got such a unique perspective through your research on gardening and young people. What's your take on this? Why is it so important? Why does it matter to young people? And what can we learn from your research?
Well, I think there's a lot in my book that is very, very relevant to everything that's been said so far, actually. And I really enjoyed hearing from Tish and Emmanuel. It's very impressive and inspiring hearing what's going on. The first thing to say about gardening is that it can help people right across the lifespan. And so everything in a way that I'm going to say about young people is relevant regardless of age. But of course, when if we're talking about people in their teens and their early 20s, for example, it's such a formative period, and you can make a big difference through relatively small interventions sometimes. I think I just want to start by talking about space in general, and the particular quality of a garden space, and why that's so important therapeutically, and particularly for people who may have experienced trauma or abuse in their lives, in their earlier lives. Tish mentioned that many of the kids who come to Jamie's suffer from a state of vigilance. They're living in unsafe environments. And a garden environment is an enclosed space. Gardens are always a protected space, but importantly, they're not one where you feel entrapped. They have an openness to them. They'll often have vistas and views, and this provides really the sort of optimum mix of what J. Appleton, the geographer, in his Psychology of Landscape, called prospect and refuge. So first of all, that's very important to establish. I think the other thing about a garden is that it's a creative space and a cared for space. And that sense of, I was very struck by Emmanuel talking about children needing to make their mark. And actually it's a fundamental human need, really, to feel that we've got to have a sense of effectiveness in the world, that we can shape some part of our world. And a garden does that for many, many people. And a great number of the young people I interviewed on various projects, two that feature in the book are the Thrive project, called Growing Options, and also Chicago Botanic Garden youth farms. And I've just got a message that you can't hear me. Is that right? No, you can't. I think something may have come
with your internet connection. So we'll maybe we'll just pause a little bit on your not because of your content, but it's just that a little bit hard to hear. So we'll pause and come back to you soon. And what I'm going to do is just move on, because what Sue's talking about there is the idea of agency for young people through creativity, and also the idea of being able to care for something. In her case, she's talking about plants, whereas at Jamie's farm, it's animals, and I wondered how much that connects. Jamie's farm, Jamie introducing here Jamie Feilden. Jamie's farm isn't just about animals; it is also about gardening as well. I just wondered what your take was on what Sue was saying there.
Yeah, I think a huge amount of what Sue says resonates with the sort of DNA of who we are and what we're about and why we do what we do in the environments we do it in. I've actually spent the last 2 days at our Lewis farm, which obviously in this sunshine was looking wonderful, and I was thinking about why that's such a special space and what it does for the visiting young people. And I think something about the welcome, something about the buildings, the beautiful buildings, the beauty of the landscape. We sit just under the South Downs there. But there is a feeling that I experienced, and I think the young people visiting experience every time they arrive at one of our farms. So something about those buildings, which Peter will talk more about. But also from my point of view, I suppose as a kind of passionate farmer, I think I tried to shed it throughout my life, kind of tried to lose interest. It was a slightly embarrassing thing that I was passionate and excited about, but I don't seem to have been able to do that. So I remain excited about farming and passionate about it. And all of our farms are thriving working farms. And I suppose for me, the key to that is that there's purpose. A farm never stops. The farm needs you. There's excitement and joy in farming, and often kind of disappointment. But, you know, you can engage young people very quickly and easily in that, looking after livestock and getting involved in the processes on a farm. And one of the things that children have said a lot to us recently is that coming to one of our farms is like going back in time. That you walk into the courtyard, you see the animals, you see the old buildings, and you get a real sense perhaps of what they might have seen in a kind of storybook of what a farm is like. But to me, that creates a kind of calm and the right energy that allows us to make the big changes that we hope to make each week with the children that visit.
Thanks. And that leads me right on to Peter, because Peter not only is I think I described you as a pioneer of environmental design, but also has been responsible for really shaping the way that Jamie's farms look for children and how they are. How have you thought about that? And what do you think is the importance of that space for young people?
Well, it's very interesting from my perspective. I think the earlier conversation we heard with Emmanuel and Jake actually covers a lot of the territory really, really well. I mean, it is those are the principles in a way that we have started with at Jamie's Farm. It's I think firstly, it's the insistence that one is creating a large home rather than a smaller institution. And how do you define what a home is? And a home, the key aspects, I think, are you know, where is the center? Where is the heart of a home? It used to be just around the fireplace, because that's where everybody off or the kitchen table. You still? I've been told that I've got connection problems. Can you still hear me?
I can still hear you, but keep going for the moment. Hopefully, it'll clear up.
Okay. All right. Fine. So you know, the starting point for most of the Jamie's farms has been the dining table and the adjacent kitchen, because that is where life takes place. That is where communities are made. That is where, when you sit down and enjoy a meal together, or you create the meal together, and after the meal, there is an opportunity for coming together, for conversation, for work that is very naturally therapeutic. It's therapy on the hoof kind of thing. It just happens that you're creating a community around that table. So interesting, it's the size of the table that is the difficult thing sometimes, because of the size of the community. But I think the creation of a sense of home and the creation of a sense of security, as Tish was talking about earlier, and the creation of spaces that are both appropriate for a sense of individuality and privacy. We heard that from some of the children. You know, one girl said the space she loved best was in her room, and another girl said the space she loved best was on the top of a hill. You know, you couldn't imagine two spaces that are more opposite from each other. But actually, we have to create that sense of security for ourselves everywhere, and with it comes a sense of our self-identity and also our part within the community that we belong to. So I think it's been a fascinating journey for us.
Thanks, Peter. And I'm just to flag while people are listening, on the right-hand side, we've got a chat segment where you can put in questions. So please do put in any questions, and we'll put them to the panelists. But the next person I wanted to come to was Chris Wright, who's been listening to all that. He's obviously, Chris, I'd love to know, have you been to the Youth Farm? And with 35 years experience in sort of youth justice and working with young people, what is your perception of the importance of space? You heard about Emmanuel trying to avoid the institutional feel. How do you think, how important is that for young people?
Thanks, James. Well, look, I feel a slight imposter on this panel. I'm just a jobbing social worker, but I've been listening to what everybody's been saying with real kind of joy, actually, because people are speaking so much sense about the things that really matter. And I think my frustration over a fairly long career has been that we've lost sight of the things that really matter, and we end up measuring all the things that are easy to measure and lead to a kind of compliance culture. So to Emmanuel's point around why 80% of children's homes are deemed good or outstanding, it's because they're being measured against things which allow them to be assessed as good. I used to, I was in a children's services management team, and one of our jobs was we would go around the children's homes in the authority and measure their compliance against the regulations. And I can assure you that every one of those homes felt like an institution. They didn't feel like a home at all. They felt like places where children were placed, and you know the kind of turnover of staff, the signage, all the things that Emmanuel has been talking to are very present, because those are the things that you need to be able to tick off on your tick box in order to be compliant, and therefore allow yourself to get measured as good. So I've become hugely frustrated over 30 odd years that we kind of hit the target but miss the point. That we spend a lot of our time, as I said, measuring compliance. When I was talking to Jake about doing this, I told him a story of 30 odd years ago when I was a first year probation officer. I turned up in my first probation office in inner city Nottingham, and I had a bag of tricks. I'd been to a fancy university. I'd got some decent qualifications behind me, and there was a guy in the probation office who'd been a fishmonger, and he trained as a probation officer late in life. And he said to me, "Chris, the most important thing, there are three things. People need somewhere decent to live, they need something useful to do, and they need people around them who care for them." And Emmanuel referred to people, place and purpose and pedagogy. Catch 22 uses those principles of people, place and purpose. And you can't underestimate the importance of place. I guess the thing most of us have in common who are on this panel or indeed listening in, we've got somewhere decent to live. We feel that we're doing something useful with our lives, and we're probably surrounded by people who love us. Those seem to me to be the fairly fundamental requirements of a good life. And if we were to organise the way public services are provided around those principles, I think we might achieve better outcomes.
I love that. Place, purpose, and people. That's absolutely captures it. And we're hitting the target and maybe missing the point. I'm going to come back, Sue, to you, and again do pass any thoughts or questions, listeners, into the channel, and we will pass them on to our guests. But Sue, hopefully your Wi-Fi is stabilised a bit, and it would be great to hear what your reflection is. So you talked about the importance of, for young people, of creativity and having some agency and caring, having the ability to care for something, even as small as a plant. Yeah, that seems to have come out critically, doesn't it? You're on mute. Let me unmute you if I can. Or I think you might need to unmute yourself, Sue. Yes, that's the one.
Okay, I hope you can hear me now.
We can.
Yeah, I mean, yes, both of those came through very strongly, and I think that let's start with the first thing, which is the feeling of effectiveness, and that the risk is that if that's blocked, then it gets expressed destructively. So the opportunity in a safe setting to shape part of the world creatively, if you like, whether that's through gardening or farming or whatever, is enormously important. And I think, I quote the psychoanalyst and paediatrician Donald Winnicott in my book. He thought the sense of joy in being a cause was so important to childhood health, to mental health for children, and that the ability to do that through play especially, and you know, I think the sense of freedom that comes across, you know, there's a blurry line between play on the one hand and things like gardening and being in nature, which fosters free play and that sense of freedom. So I think all of that really matters. On the other hand, care is also something that I think culturally we have come to undervalue the place of. You know, the economics of whether it's care homes or hospitals, or, you know, has often taken precedence over creating a cared for space and a caring environment. But also the ability to express care is actually neurologically a replenishing thing. It's associated with our endorphin system. And you know, the giving and receiving of care is associated also with oxytocin, which is a bonding hormone that has anti-trauma effects as well. So these kind of experiences are for young people who lack self-belief enormously important in sort of, you know, giving them a sense of self-esteem and the sense of purpose and motivation that Jamie mentioned.
This is absolutely fascinating, and that sort of neurological connection is something that hadn't really occurred to me. But linking some of the things that you've said with what others have said, the idea of you know, that we've somehow lost that, undervalued that sense of care, that we're not giving young people those kind of experiences to enjoy caring for others that perhaps we have in the past. Jamie's sense that young people, when they arrive at the farm, feel that they're going back in time. Are we being a little bit overly gloomy that we have lost something, and actually is it possible to rediscover or recapture the things that we're talking about? And I'm just coming to Chris because I know he's irrepressibly optimistic, even despite what he said. I just wonder how pessimistic or optimistic would we be from what the observations that we're hearing?
But I'm incredibly optimistic when I listen to people like Emmanuel, and I see the work of Jamie and Jake and Tish, because that gives you hope. And just listening to Sue, you know, I think one of the problems we've got is that we don't value care. We've ended up. I worry that, and I say this with a degree of caution, but I worry that a lot of our caring services have become overly professionalized. I think that was a phrase that Jake used earlier, whereby it's almost as though that caring isn't sufficient. We feel that it's not enough to be a caring person and considerate and compassionate. So we kind of don't elevate that to the status required of a professional. And so I'm not suggesting we shouldn't behave professionally, but I think often a lot of the caring services have become over-professionalized to the point that we miss the point around what we really should be doing. But why I am optimistic, because the world is full of people who actually do want to do good things. And if we can create the environment which allows people to give of themselves, then we have reason to be hopeful. I'm very keen to see children's social care change. I'm really pleased to see Josh McAllister leading the care review, and I hope that there's going to be some very positive recommendations coming out of that based on what young people are saying. Because actually, if we listen to young people, you probably would end up with a set of arrangements which are much more aligned to meeting their needs. So I'm pretty optimistic. One thing I wanted to say, and I'm slightly anxious in saying this in Sue's presence, but I came across a piece of work some 10, 15 years ago now by a psychotherapist called Scott Miller, who they did some meta-analysis around what works in psychotherapy, and I think it applies beyond psychotherapy. But essentially what they said was 40% of what delivers a successful outcome is the environment you create through which you deliver your therapy. 30% is based on the ability to forge a positive relationship. 15% is the ability to instill hope in people. And the final 15% was the intervention itself. So it seems to me that 85% of what you're going to achieve good outcomes if you build good relationships, you create a good environment to engage people, and you believe in people. That should be the foundation for our social work and indeed more broadly our people-facing services. Anyway.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That definitely resonates. 85% is due to the environment and the people around the young people, rather than perhaps any specific interventions. And given that it's all about creating, what we're talking about really is creating that environment. We've got a great question here from Rosita, who's a youth engagement officer on a regeneration project in London. And she's wondering about the importance of a sense of space and greenness in urban settings, but especially to do with deprived young people in central London, for example. How important is that? And I'm going to come to Peter, comment on that, and also just more generally on this this sort of challenge, I suppose, that is being placed to the current system, which is that it's not creating, whether it's children's homes, schools, not creating environments that are conducive to care. Peter, you're on mute. I don't know if you can.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah. Well, I think we've learned a hell of a lot, haven't we, over the last year about the importance, particularly of open space and greenery and nature in our cities. And I think we have neglected that really, really badly. And I think things are changing. Things are changing fundamentally in the way we're designing cities and looking at our cities, and also creating communities that are maybe on the fringes of cities. You know, I think again, it's a question of scale. And I think we're moving towards a situation where there's the scale of the communities that we're creating are smaller, and that people have better access to the natural environment within those smaller communities. I'd just like to come back to one other thing, though, which is this issue of Jamie's farms obviously start with farms, right? And farms are communities. They always were. They were communities of families and largely extended families, and the animals that form part of those communities as well. And I think it's just it's a brilliant idea that Jamie had all those years ago to actually use that as a way of helping people to learn the value of communities and come to be part of those communities. And if you look at even when they first come into the farm, you know, they're brought into the farmyard generally, and they're surrounded by buildings. So there's a sense of security, there's a sense of identity there. And I think that's so important. And everywhere where we have designed everything, we take care of the external environments of the buildings and the farms, as well as the internal environments. And I think the first impressions of our farms are incredibly important. And I just like to thank all those people who are looking after their farms, because they do an incredibly good job keeping that sense of quality in both the natural environment and the internal man-made environment.
Thanks, Peter. And there's another great question here from Philippa, who's wondering, as many of us obviously don't have access to indoor-outdoor space, of the kind that we would like. Does the panel have any thoughts, tips on how teachers and caregivers can recreate some of the magic from Jamie's farm with limited space? So this is one for Jamie. If you had, what could you do if you were in a third floor flat or in a room in a school and you didn't have the wonderful farm, what could you do? What's your tip?
Well, we've got 30 pet lambs in Bath, so if people get down there quick, you can have one each. They need homes. Well, that actually was, I mean, there was a bit more space than living in a flat, but the first thing I ever did at the start of Jamie's Farm was take some animals to the playground in Croydon. And we had 2 lambs there that certainly reduced the amount of fights that were going on. And that was partly to do with what Sue mentioned about giving and receiving of care. And I think she summed that up really nicely, and that really resonated with me. I'm not getting to the question here. I'm going to what happens on our farms. But I think even in a small environment, certainly our city farm in London, that's only half an acre site, and we only have half of it. We do have animals there that are looked after and are productive, and that's very successful. But I think Sue could talk more about the benefits of gardening. Certainly through lockdown, I'd never grown vegetables before, and I've been growing vegetables, and even in a small scale with some seedlings in our kitchen over the last few months, and that has been really beneficial to me, even as someone who has probably got about 1,000 livestock in my care in different areas. So I think there's a huge amount you can do in terms of gardening at home. But I think, getting into livestock farming perhaps in a flat is not necessarily the idea. But I did mention the lambs in Croydon. As a follow-up from that, we had a head teacher at Oasis South Bank, a school that was started in an ex-office block, and they just turned it into a school as it was. But they wanted to bring something of the farm to it. So I did deliver lambs once to the 3rd story of that building, and they kept the lambs on the 3rd story for about 6 weeks. And I've got some great pictures of the head teacher right outside Elephant and Castle Tube with holding those lambs. But so we have got a bit of an experience of urban farming with varying degrees of success.
Well, if you can't have a lamb, Sue, what would you recommend that you could do with little space?
Well, firstly, you can do some things indoors and on windowsills and things like that. So, there's quite a lot of interesting research on the impact of introducing houseplants, for example, into working environments as well as things like care homes. And on top of that, for children, I'd have thought sowing seeds and seeing them germinate. I mean, the magic of seeds is I think so compelling. It really means you touch somehow a little bit of the mystery of life to see a seed unfolding, and then maybe it might be possible to get some grow bags and grow something, whether it's tomatoes or something that germinates fast for children and that's really reliable. I think sunflowers are great, for example, but radishes, the children don't always like them. They do grow very quickly. So I think there's something about just getting it going and making it possible is really, really important. But I think the other thing for urban children is this what's been called plant blindness. It's a term that was coined in the 80s by 2 biologists who were concerned about how people living in cities simply stopped noticing the plants around them and filtered them out as if they were irrelevant. And at the same time, there's a large body of research that's come out recently from the University of Derby, led by Miles Richardson, into the importance of not just spending time outdoors for mental health, but of connectedness to the natural world. So I think whether it's through field trips or walks in the park or whatever with children, just engaging them in activities within nature where they're called on to notice what's going on, whether it's counting the insects or taking photographs of things. I don't think it matters. It's just getting their eye and that sense of connection. And then from there, I think, the appreciation of beauty follows, which is very important, as Tish mentioned.
That's a terrible. I mean, that's really helpful, but it's also a sort of shocking concept, plant blindness, which reminds me of talking to a teacher in a West London, a school in a West London estate, who took pupils up a mountain for the first time, and one of the students said that he had never been on ground that wasn't flat before. He'd never experienced a hill in his life, which was quite shocking, really, to hear. So it is so vitally important to extend young people's experiences. Now, I'm just going to give the final word of this discussion to Chris, because he said that he felt underqualified. So I would just want to hear, I suppose the question is, we're talking about space, the importance of how actually these things are things that matter, as you put it, and we've slightly lost sight of the things that matter. And I'd like to ask, from a practical point of view, how do you convince, as a practitioner, as somebody perhaps running a charity, running an organisation, how do you convince others that it does matter? How do you convince budget to be released to spend on a more expensive, higher quality building? How do you do that? You're an absolute expert at this. Share your gems with us.
Well, thanks for that, James. Because the way to convince people is by making a connection to what's effective, what works, all the things that Sue has been talking about, all the things that Peter's been talking about, what Jamie's talking about. There's one of the things that frustrates me more than anything is we constantly claim that there's not enough evidence to inform policy. There's plenty of evidence. We just don't want to deploy it. We know what works. We know the things that are important. We know that actually, if you do invest in some of this stuff up front, then it will save money down the line. And these are, these are political decisions that can be taken. It's just essentially all the stuff around, well, we can't afford to do that. Well, we can afford to do it because we end up spending money when we don't do it. So, the consequence of not getting it right are very serious. And if we put the resources in the right place at the right time in the right way, then I think we are likely to create the conditions in which people can live a good life. And many of us take for granted what we've got. I think the last 12 months have been a very telling time in relation to that. And I for one, have taken great pleasure in just being in my garden and listening to birds singing. It's some of these things are really powerful and important parts of the human condition, and we need to make sure that policymakers recognise that things like that are really critical and important. And then you get people like Emmanuel who are pushing the boundaries, he's going to change. He will change the world. He will change the way children's homes are perceived in this country. And he's done that through using the evidence of what's effective and what works. So there's lots of evidence. Let's start to use it and inform policy making with all the evidence of what's important in people's lives.
Chris, thank you so much for wrapping that up so brilliantly and reminding us that we were witnessing in Digging the Deep the beginning of something that is going to change the world of children's care, which is, I think you're right there. I'd just like to wrap up by saying a massive thank you to Sue, Chris, Peter and Jamie for sharing their insights and really I've loved listening to you all, and there's all sorts of comments there that are going to stick with me, particularly plant blindness, which is alarming. But I think there's so much hope as well in everything that you had to say. So we are going to move on now, and I'll let you guys slip off from the stage while we move on to the next item, which we've heard from Jamie already. And we've heard about his farm, but we haven't yet heard from farmers. So the next item is an opportunity to really show you around the farm, see what goes on and hear from the farmers themselves with Jamie. So that's the next bit.
Welcome to Hill House Farm. Here we are at the HQ of Jamie's farm, where it all began in 2010, our first farm of 5. I just wanted to talk you through today and show you some of the elements of what we do from a farming perspective. We are a true mixed farm, so we have cattle, sheep, pigs, poultry, horses, all here at the farm in Bath, and we have those across our farms across the country. That's really important so that the kids can get involved in all different elements of livestock production, seeing them close at hand. You can see here we have some, well, they're actually 200-year-old pigsties. You can see the little piggies here in the sun enjoying themselves right close by to where the kids' accommodation is, so the children all stay in this house here. Next door we've got some of our pedigree Aberdeen Angus cattle. They're just about to give birth, so these guys start calving in the next week or so, again right nearby the children, so that throughout the spring, as these cattle give birth, the children will be able to come and see that process. I mentioned chickens. We've got a few chickens out here in the yard, and we're just starting to breed various pedigree poultry at this farm, and doing the same across the other farms. Next, I'm going to hand over to our farm managers around the country, who are going to tell you a bit about the 4 elements of what really contribute and what's thought about when making any farming decision at Jamie's farm.
I think that throughout the year it's very important to think about the safety first of all of the tasks, how interesting they are and the importance of them as well, and making sure that the young people understand the importance of these jobs that need to be done. And I think through giving them that idea of what we're doing and why we're doing it, it brings them into the farm and it engages them, it encourages them to do things that they've never done before, and also it shows them a way of life that they might not have seen. So behind us, as you can see, we've got our sheep that are lambing. These are the last few, but we've had a fantastic amount of young people that have come in and managed to lamb and get involved and be directly seeing how life on the farm works and life of lambing works.
High animal welfare is crucial in all the decisions that we make at Jamie's farm. When the young people come to visit, they can see that these animals are cared for and well looked after, which allows them to feel that they can be looked after and cared for too. This is part of our culture of care. We can show kindness to our animals by feeding them before we feed ourselves, and when they are indoors, they have warm, spacious pens to live in. This allows our animals to live happy lives, and something that we are really proud of at Jamie's farm.
At Jamie's farm, we really like to farm with environment at the top of our priority list, really. We want to be working with nature, working with the environment, making improvements to our soils and our ecology, really, planting lots of hedges, as we do on lots of our farms, lots of trees, really trying to improve it whilst using fewer inputs as possible, really to create a long-term sustainable view that doesn't cost us a huge amount of money in inputs, but is also improving the world for a brighter future.
Hi, I'm Doug and this is my son Jamie. Together we manage the farm in Bath.
One of the things we consider with every decision we make at the farm is the economics. It is really important that the farm is profitable and is self-sustaining and could actually give back to the charity instead of rely on the charity. One of the ways we do this is by ensuring we have really good pastures who support our animals so they're not completely dependent on bought-in food to keep our costs lower. And another way we do this is by keeping an eye on all of the prices elsewhere, so we can get the best price for our meat and other produce.
Thank you so much to all our farmers for contributing today. It's great to see our staff and hear their thoughts on the way that we're farming now at Jamie's farm. I wanted to first of all say thanks to those guys, but also tell you a bit about the history of agriculture with the charity. We've been around now for almost 12 years. And in the early days, I think we were farming in the way that most people probably were farming, in that we were kind of fighting against nature along the way. We were fighting with the animals, if you like. We were fighting with nature. We were trying to produce as much as possible, and we were using huge inputs. Not particularly on fertiliser and pesticides, but we were having to spray our pastures, and we were buying huge amounts of bought-in food that often included a very large proportion of soya. And every year, whatever we did, we were struggling to make the farms break even. So in the last few years, we started to be a little bit more thoughtful about the way we're farming, and we're trying to think carefully about learning from other regenerative farms and improving our practices so that we can essentially create a more sustainable model for the charity from a financial perspective, but also work with nature and educate the children that visit about that and the benefits of farming in a regenerative way. The first thing that we've done in the last few years is we started to use herbal lays, and we planted herbal lays at 3 out of our 4 farms, and we're increasing the proportion of our pasture that is herbal lay. I'm standing here in a field which has been reseeded 2 years ago with a mixture of herbs, legumes and a variety of deep-rooted grasses. These pastures are fantastic because they are amazing for pollinators. So if you come in this field in about 2 months, it will be swarming with bees, and there'll be beautiful flowers that those bees will be benefiting from. The pastures are also very high in protein, so the animals thrive when they're eating the silage and the grass, and they require a lot less bought-in protein. The plants within them are legumes and therefore produce their own nitrogen, and so we use a lot less fertiliser. In fact, we haven't used any fertiliser at all in the past couple of years. Their deep-rooted nature also means that they're drought-resistant, so on the drier years we're still yielding the same amount of grass as we would on a wetter year. And these have really revolutionised and improved our farming, as I say, across 3 out of the 4 farms so far. The other thing that you can see in this field is the field boundaries. So there's a copse up there and there's a hedgerow down here. We've been improving our hedgerows, planting new hedgerows, fencing our hedgerows to protect them from the livestock. And those act as wildlife corridors and do a great job of providing habitats for birds, bees, and a whole range of different species. So our farms tend to be teeming now with wildlife in a way that they weren't initially. The other thing that we've been doing, and something that I'm very passionate about, is improving the genetics of our livestock. So we have pedigree Aberdeen Angus cattle, we have pedigree low-line cattle, and we're looking particularly at their genetic potential to achieve improved growth on less food because of their genetic potential. So behind me are some Clegg sheep, often crossed with Texel sheep. We breed both of those breeds pure, and we only buy rams with high genetic potential because now it is possible to look at the figures that come with your livestock and understand how they will perform within your system. All of this is contributing to us farming in a more sustainable way, where we're sequestering more carbon, our pastures are taking more out of the atmosphere, we're growing more grass, and we're hopefully helping to create a more sustainable way of producing livestock and ultimately quality meat to supply to the local communities that can be sold at a reasonable price to contribute back and help develop and sustain the charity. All of this is really about a long-term view of how we should treat our planet and how children should come and engage and learn about nature and hopefully create sustainable and bright futures for themselves as a result.
Fantastic. Jamie, thank you so much. And it's really interesting to get that view of the farm, which is obviously not available to people so much at the moment, but hopefully will be soon. I think it's also fascinating to hear how much you, as in Jamie's farm, has been learning and is now sharing through these series about caring not just for the young people, not just for the animals, but as you've just heard, for the environment and the planet as well. So I think this is a good moment to come back and really wrap it up together. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to invite Tish, the co-founder of Jamie's Farm, up to the stage. You heard her earlier talking to the young people on the farm, and it would be great to just hear, Tish, your perspective, given you've been listening in, what you've heard. What are you taking away from this discussion? What do you think are the key points?
Well, I've just found it so interesting hearing everyone's contribution and the amount of overlap that there is. But I thought that there was a very key question, which was about whether how teachers can benefit, or schools, or I'm thinking offices, organisations, people who don't have the good fortune that we have to be working in a very beautiful rural environment. And I'm remembering a book I read about death and dying in the best possible way, but saying how when they introduce plants into care homes and have animals within care homes for the elderly, and the same is true for children, I think, that there's an increase in well-being. And I think it's a human instinct that we've been talking about today for people to nurture and care and look after nature and their environment. I love that Emmanuel talked about the children moving into this new home are going to have a hand in creating it, choosing, individualizing some of what they want. And that, as Peter said, the heart of a home is critical, but I think the heart of a school, the heart of a classroom is very important. And I think we've gone too far down the line of standardization. And when we talk about Ofsted and fulfilling the criteria, I don't think we've re-examined the criteria sufficiently. And Chris talked about this. I think we have to get back to how do we humanize places, increase association, increase a sense of safety and well-being, a place that people thrive, whether it's an internal space, whether it's created like a school, or whether it's a space we create on a windowsill or in a garden, or a den that children build in fields. I think memory goes along with places, and that ability to have that rich tapestry where association becomes a positive thing. It becomes the association of feeling calm, of feeling good, of feeling stretched, of feeling creative. I think that we need to attend to that. And I've been rather shocked. My late husband, Richard, Peter's partner, was passionate about architecture in schools. And I visited a lot of schools, some of which I just felt were like, some of the new schools felt to me like they were airports. They didn't feel that they were human. They were sort of scaled to a child. They were noisy. They were hard surfaces. When the bell rang, it was like being on Paddington Station. I think that a place, the materials we use, the colours we use, whether it's the built environment, bringing nature to the doorstep or allowing nature, views of nature from the buildings. I think design is very important, but relationship and that physical care, so involving mind, body and spirit. And I think that's why Jamie's Farm's been so successful, is that children eat well, they play well, they talk well, they work together well, they generate their sense of belonging. And so maybe the activities that we create within spaces need to be linked to the design and architecture and planning of those spaces. And we need to bring in more of this holistic thinking in everything and in our offices. You know, my other son's an architect. He was talking today about the redesigning of offices now and the importance of creating communal spaces in them, because if people work from home but only come in a day a week, what will be important is where they socialize, where they congregate. Can they eat together? Can they share stories, ideas, you know, what's happening?
It's interesting. That's an interesting point, because I suspect we are going through an inflection point over how we think about our workspaces as a result, obviously, of the pandemic and the fact that nobody's been in a workspace for the last year, really, or most people environment. And when we go back to them, as we're beginning to do, we're going to be occupying them very differently, probably not as much time, and we're going to be using them differently. Do you think that, clearly what's come through very much in this conversation so far is that it's really, really important to attend thoughtfully to how space is used for young people? Do you think this, when we go back after the pandemic, that is going to change, or are we just going to slip back into the way we did things before?
I think it's a good question, James, because I think there's a real risk that we slip back. I think there's, we choose easy options when we're under pressure. And I think that, for instance, teachers are under huge pressure at the moment. They're trying to reassemble and regenerate the culture of their school and the children's engagement. I think it is a really important time to press the pause button and think, what could we do differently now? And I hope at a government and policy level they're going to do the same, because I think that schools have become more like factories in terms of the churning out children with the right attainments in terms of the exam results. And some of these other things have been put further down the agenda. I think if we want to produce the potential of this next generation, we need to be thinking in these broader terms. And it's so evident to us on the farms that children come who've been failing in schools, and they've actually been more than failing, they've often been really causing quite a lot of havoc. And yet we discover that they're intelligent, thoughtful, hardworking, amazing young people, but there's been nowhere to evidence that. And if a school and a community can become a place where children have more ownership over the environment, so that they have gardens to garden, lambs, like Jamie said, maybe to feed in the playground, or maybe chicks hatching in the classroom, as someone mentioned in the chat, or growing their sunflowers, or a sense of just bringing them down into the present and out of what is that sort of very hyperactive, it's so full on, isn't it? A lot of workplaces, a lot of schools, there's not a lot of calm.
Yeah. And just finishing up now, you mentioned teachers and what they can take from this and the pressure they're under. You are actually launching a series of podcasts to support teachers specifically. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we've been really aware of how we're hearing of terrible figures about mental health issues, and those children aren't going to be being seen by CAMS, many of them, because there simply isn't the capacity. The teachers are going to be working with them, and the peer group are going to be trying to support them. So this series of podcasts is trying to help teachers look at, firstly, how to make positive relationships and build a positive culture in their classroom, and then looking at the kinds of behaviours that they might be seeing. For instance, the child who's obstructive or difficult, the child who's withdrawn, or the class clown. And each one in this series of 4 will be really trying to work with the teacher, looking at how you can both understand what that behaviour might be coming from and how to communicate better and circumvent it, not push their triggers, and strategies that will work for the teacher, the class and the individual. So I'm looking forward to that, because I'm going to be in community, having conversations with teachers, and they are happening over the next couple of months, James. The first one's just coming out tomorrow with our teachers newsletter, but it'll also be on our website, and we'll try and get them available. And then I just want to say one last thing, which was that one of the things that really has always made me feel sad as well as laugh is that children who come to the farm often say, is this the same country? Are we in England? And sometimes they're not, they're in Wales, one of our farms. And do you use the same currency? And what I was going to say about classrooms and teachers is, if we can let the bounds of education widen, if we can have more enrichment for children, more taking them out into the countryside. Emmanuel's saying his children's home is on the border of Surrey, but it relates to the city. A lot of schools are like that. People have been walking during COVID. They've loved nature. It's been a lifesaver. Let's see if teachers and schools enable children to build that relationship with the countryside and make that happen.
love that. I mean, thank you so much, Tish, and thank you to everybody who's contributed. I am sort of left with the phrase that I think it was Chris introduced, of the importance of, for every young person and actually every adult, of people, purpose and place, to be surrounded by people who care about you, to have a purpose and activity that matters and has meaning, and to have a place that is decent and of high, reasonable quality to live in. It's not much to ask for, is it? And I think children, very most of all, deserve those things. So thank you, and thank you for everything that you do. I'm just going to wrap up with a few interesting points to remind people. Well, this one you possibly didn't know about, which is I just wanted to congratulate Jamie, because I understand he has received an award as for an outstanding contribution to British agriculture. And so I think his film illustrated very clearly the contribution that he's making, not only to children, but to agriculture. Well-deserved award. And then the last two things, excitingly, Jamie's farm is opening to residential visits again from the 17th of May. Apparently the DFE has given permission, and that you are reopening to young people from the 17th of May. Very exciting. And then finally, you will have heard, and it's in the chat, the next event of this series, Digging Deep, is going to be in person. We can actually come together and see each other in an actual real place. So please do sign up. There's a link in the chat. It'll be at the farm in Wiltshire, and it'll be on the 24th of July. It'll be a day-long discussion in the flesh. You can wear clothes, I assure you. And there will be a few drinks at the end of it. So please do sign up and come and join us for that. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you, everybody, for taking part. Thank you, everybody who listened and shared their ears with us. And we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.